Hey, what's up? For more than 60 years, just 90 miles off the coast of the United States, a small island nation has remained one of the most unusual political experiments on Earth. A communist state operating in America's immediate neighborhood, a country shaped by revolution, hardened by Cold War confrontation, and defined for generations by economic isolation and political control. But today, the island is facing one of the most serious crises in its modern history. Across Cuba, the situation has deteriorated dramatically. Millions of people are living through massive power outages. Fuel is scarce. Food is increasingly difficult to obtain. Medicine is often unavailable. Entire regions of the country are now experiencing daily blackouts that can last for hours or even most of the day. For ordinary Cubans, daily life has become a constant struggle. Refrigerators shut off when the power fails, food spoils in the heat, transportation slows or stops entirely when fuel runs out, hospitals struggle to keep critical equipment running, factories shut down, businesses close their doors, and perhaps most telling of all, millions of Cubans are leaving. In just the past few years, one of the largest migration waves in the country's history has unfolded. Families are leaving the island in search of opportunity, stability, and a future that many feel no longer exists at home. Because of all of this, a question that has been asked many times over the past half century is now being asked again. Is Cuba's government finally approaching a breaking point? To understand what is happening today, it's necessary to look at the forces that have shaped Cuba's system for decades. The roots of the current crisis go far beyond the blackouts or shortages happening today. They stretch back to the revolution that fundamentally reshaped the island in 1959. Before that year, Cuba was ruled by Fulgencio Batista, an authoritarian leader whose government maintained extremely close economic ties with the United States. American businesses operated across much of the Cuban economy. U.S. investors owned large portions of the island's agriculture, utilities, and tourism industry. Havana became known internationally for its hotels, casinos, nightlife, and tourism, much of it tied to American capital. But beneath the surface, many Cubans viewed Batista's government as corrupt and deeply unequal. Political repression increased. Opposition groups began organizing against the regime. By the late 1950s, a revolutionary movement led by Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, and a group of guerrilla fighters had launched an armed campaign to overthrow Batista's government. The revolution gained momentum quickly. On January 1st, 1959, Batista fled the country. The revolutionaries entered Havana and took power. At first, the new government did not openly declare itself communist, but events moved quickly. Over the next few years, industries were nationalized, private businesses were seized, foreign-owned property was taken under state control. At the same time, Cuba began building closer ties with the Soviet Union. Relations with the United States deteriorated rapidly. In 1961, Cuban exiles supported by the United States attempted to invade the island at the Bay of Pigs. The invasion failed. The event pushed Cuba even closer into the Soviet sphere of influence. Soon afterward, Fidel Castro formally declared Cuba a socialist state. The following year, in 1962, the United States imposed a full economic embargo on Cuba. That embargo, one of the longest-running sanctions regimes in modern history, remains largely in place today. During the Cold War, Cuba survived economically, largely because of its alliance with the Soviet Union. Moscow provided the island with oil, financial assistance, and guaranteed trade deals, especially for Cuban sugar exports. In return, Cuba became one of the Soviet Union's most important allies in the Western Hemisphere. For decades, this arrangement kept the Cuban economy functioning, but in 1991, everything changed. The Soviet Union collapsed. Almost overnight, Cuba lost its primary trading partner and its largest source of fuel. The impact was devastating. Cuba's economy contracted dramatically. Fuel shortages became widespread. Transportation slowed to a crawl. Food shortages spread across the island. Inside Cuba, this period became known as the Special Period, a time of extreme economic hardship. Many observers believed the Cuban government would not survive the crisis. But it did. The system adapted just enough to stay in place. Limited economic reforms were introduced. Tourism was expanded to bring in foreign currency. The use of US dollars was legalized within parts of the economy. And eventually, another geopolitical partner stepped in to help keep the system alive. That partner was Venezuela. Beginning in the early 2000s, Venezuela became Cuba's most important economic ally. Under President Hugo Chavez, Venezuela began sending large amounts of subsidized oil to Cuba. At its peak, the arrangement delivered roughly 100,000 barrels of oil per day to the island. In exchange, Cuba provided Venezuela with doctors, teachers, technical advisors, and security assistance. For years, that oil supply powered Cuba's electricity grid and helped stabilize the island's fragile economy. But Venezuela's own economic collapse eventually disrupted that relationship. Oil shipments gradually declined. Without that lifeline, Cuba once again began experiencing severe fuel shortages. And today, those shortages are at the heart of the country's growing energy crisis. Cuba's electrical system depends heavily on oil-fired power plants. More than 80% of the country's electricity is generated by burning oil. Many of these power plants were built decades ago during the Soviet era. They are aging, inefficient, and expensive to maintain. When oil imports decline, electricity production falls with them. That is exactly what is happening today. Across the island, power outages have become routine. In some regions, electricity may only be available for part of the day. These blackouts ripple through every part of Cuban society. Homes lose power, businesses close, food spoils, transportation systems slow down, factories shut down. Without reliable electricity, the entire economy begins to stall. But the energy crisis is only one piece of a much larger problem. Cuba is also facing severe shortages of food, medicine, and everyday goods. One reason is that the country relies heavily on imports for many essential products. To import those goods, the government needs foreign currency, often in US dollars. But Cuba's sources of foreign currency have weakened. Tourism, one of the country's most important industries, collapsed during the COVID-19 pandemic. Export revenues declined. Economic productivity slowed. At the same time, Cuba's centrally planned economic system creates structural challenges of its own. In many sectors of the economy, prices and production levels are determined by the state rather than by market demand. While this system allows the government to control key industries, it can also limit efficiency and investment. When crises occur, the system often struggles to respond quickly. Another major factor shaping Cuba's situation is its long and complicated relationship with the United States. Since the early 1960s, the United States has maintained an economic embargo against Cuba. The embargo restricts trade, financial transactions, and access to certain global financial systems. Over the decades, different American administrations have taken different approaches toward the island. Some have attempted to increase diplomatic engagement. Others have pursued stronger sanctions and economic pressure. The country was also placed back on the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism, which limits its access to international financial systems. Supporters of these policies argue that economic pressure encourages political reform. Critics argue that sanctions often worsen economic hardship for ordinary citizens. Either way, the relationship between Cuba and the United States remains one of the most important forces shaping the island's future. Another powerful signal of the current crisis is the scale of migration leaving Cuba. Since 2020, hundreds of thousands of Cubans have left the island. Many have traveled across Latin America in long journeys toward the United States. Others have relocated to Europe or other countries in the Americas. For a nation with a population of around 11 million people, this migration wave represents a massive demographic shift. Families are leaving not only because of political frustration, but because of economic survival. So with energy shortages, economic decline, migration, and international pressure all happening at once, many observers are asking the same question: could Cuba's government collapse? The answer is not simple. Historically, the Cuban system has proven remarkably resilient. It survived the collapse of the Soviet Union. It endured decades of sanctions and economic hardship. It has maintained centralized political control for more than 6 decades. At the same time, the pressures on the system today are real. Economic conditions are worsening. Public frustration is growing. And the country's population is shrinking as people leave in search of opportunity elsewhere. Looking ahead, Cuba faces several possible paths. The government could pursue deeper economic reforms and allow greater private enterprise. It could attempt to build new economic partnerships with other countries, or it could continue relying on the centralized system that has defined the island's political identity since the revolution. The role of the United States will also continue to shape what happens next. Future administrations could pursue stronger economic pressure, or they could attempt diplomatic engagement. Both approaches have been tried before. Neither has yet fundamentally transformed the political system that has governed Cuba for more than 60 years. What happens next remains uncertain. But one thing is clear. For more than half a century, Cuba has existed in a unique position in the world, a socialist state just off the coast of the United States. A country shaped by revolution, geopolitical rivalry, and decades of economic pressure. Today, the island once again stands at a crossroads. Energy shortages, economic strain, and migration are testing the resilience of a system that has endured for generations. Whether Cuba reforms, adapts, or continues on its current path is a question that will shape not only the future of the island, but the future of the entire region. And for a country located just 90 miles from American shores, what happens next will matter far beyond Cuba itself. The world is watching, and the story is far from over.
Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Peace!